Chapter 11. 2 candles were burning on the stand-up desk. Mr. Jones, tightly enfolded in an old but gorgeous blue silk dressing-gown, kept his elbows close against his sides and his hands deeply plunged into the extraordinarily deep pockets of the garment. The costume accentuated his emaciation. He resembled a painted pole leaning against the edge of the desk, with a dried head of dubious distinction stuck on the top of it. Ricardo lounged in the doorway. Indifferent in appearance to what was going on, he was biding his time. At a given moment, between 2 flickers of lightning, he melted out of his frame into the outer air. His disappearance was observed on the instant by Mr. Jones, who abandoned his nonchalant immobility against the desk and made a few steps calculated to put him between Haste and the doorway. "It's awfully close," he remarked. Haste, in the middle of the room, had made up his mind to speak plainly. "We haven't met to talk about the weather. You favoured me earlier in the day with a rather cryptic phrase about yourself. 'I am he that is,' you said. What does that mean?" Mr. Jones, without looking at Haste, continued his absent-minded movements till, attaining the desired position, he brought his shoulders with a thump against the wall near the door and raised his head. In the emotion of the decisive moment, his haggard face glistened with perspiration. Drops ran down his hollow cheeks and almost blinded the spectral eyes in their bony caverns. "It means that I am a person to be reckoned with." "No, stop! Don't put your hand into your pocket. Don't!" His voice had a wild, unexpected shrillness. Haste started, and there ensued a moment of suspended animation, during which the thunder's deep bass muttered distantly, and the doorway to the right of Mr. Jones flickered with bluish light. At last Haste shrugged his shoulders. He even looked at his hand. He didn't put it in his pocket, however. Mr. Jones, glued against the wall, watched him raise both his hands to the end of his horizontal moustaches, and answered the note of interrogation in his steady eyes. "A matter of prudence," said Mr. Jones in his natural hollow tones, and with a face of death-like composure. "A man of your free life has surely perceived that. You're a much talked-about man, Mr. Haste, and though, as far as I understand, you're accustomed to employ the subtler weapons of intelligence, still I can't afford to take any risks of the grosser methods. I'm not unscrupulous enough to be a match for you in the use of intelligence, but I assure you, Mr. Haste, that in the other way you are no match for me. I have you covered at this very moment." "You've been covered ever since you entered this room." "Yes, from my pocket." During this harangue, Haste looked deliberately over his shoulder, stepped back a pace, and sat down at the end of the camp bedstead. Leaning his elbow on one knee, he laid his cheek in the palm of his hand and seemed to meditate on what he should say next. Mr. Jones, planted against the wall, was obviously waiting for some sort of overture. As nothing came, he resolved to speak himself, but he hesitated. For though he considered that the most difficult step had been taken, he said to himself that every stage of progress required great caution, lest the man in Ricardo's phraseology should start to prance, which would be most inconvenient. He fell back on a previous statement. "And I am a person to be reckoned with." The other man went on looking at the floor as if he were alone in the room. There was a pause. "You have heard of me, then?" Haste said at length, looking up. "I should think so. We've been staying at Schomburg's hotel." Haste choked on the word. "What's the matter, Mr. Haste?" "Nothing. Nausea," Haste said resignedly. He resumed his former attitude of meditative indifference. "What is this reckoning you are talking about?" he asked after a time, in the quietest possible tone. "I don't know you." "It's obvious that we belong to the same social sphere," began Mr. Jones with languid irony. Inwardly he was as watchful as he could be. "Something has driven you out. The originality of your ideas, perhaps. Or your tastes." Mr. Jones indulged in one of his ghastly smiles. In repose his features had a curious character of evil, exhausted austerity. But when he smiled, the whole mask took on an unpleasantly infantile expression. A recrudescence of the rolling thunder invaded the room loudly, and passed into silence. "You are not taking this very well," observed Mr. Jones. This was what he said, but as a matter of fact he thought that the business was shaping quite satisfactorily. The man, he said to himself, had no stomach for a fight. Aloud he continued, "Oh, come, you can't expect to have it always your own way. And you are a man of the world." "And you?" Haste interrupted him unexpectedly. "How do you define yourself?" "I, dear sir? In one way I am. Yes, I am the world itself, come to pay you a visit. In another sense I am an outcast, almost an outlaw. If you prefer a less materialistic view, I am a sort of fate, the retribution that waits its time." "I wish to goodness you were the commonest sort of ruffian," said Haste, raising his equable gaze to Mr. Jones. "One would be able to talk to you straight then, and hope for some humanity. As it is, I dislike violence and ferocity of every sort, as much as you do," Mr. Jones declared, looking very languid as he leaned across the wall, but speaking fairly loud. "You can ask my Martin if it is not so. This, Mr. Haste, is a soft age. It is also an age without prejudices. I've heard that you are free from them yourself. You mustn't be shocked if I tell you plainly that we are after your money. Or I am, if you prefer to make me alone responsible. Pedro, of course, knows no more of it than any other animal would. Ricardo is of the faithful retainer class, absolutely identified with all my ideas, wishes, and even whims." Mr. Jones pulled his left hand out of his pocket, got a handkerchief out of another, and began to wipe the perspiration from his forehead, neck, and chin. The excitement from which he suffered made his breathing visible. In his long dressing gown he had the air of a convalescent invalid who had imprudently overtaxed his strength. Haste, broad-shouldered, robust, watched the operation from the end of the camp bedstead, very calm, his hands on his knees. "And, by the way," he asked, "where is he now, that henchman of yours? Breaking into my desk?" "That would be crude. Still, crudeness is one of life's conditions." There was the slightest flavour of banter in the tone of Ricardo's governor. "Conceivable, but unlikely. Martin is a little crude. But you are not, Mr. Haste. To tell you the truth, I don't know precisely where he is. He has been a little mysterious of late, but he has my confidence. No, don't get up, Mr. Haste." The viciousness of his spectral face was indescribable. Haste, who had moved a little, was surprised by the disclosure. "It was not my intention," he said. "Pray remain seated," Mr. Jones insisted, in a languid voice, but with a very determined glitter in his black eye caverns. "If you were more observant," said Haste with dispassionate contempt, "you would have known before I had been 5 minutes in the room that I had no weapon of any sort on me." "Possibly, but pray keep your hands still. They are very well where they are. This is too big an affair for me to take any risks." "Big? Too big?" Haste repeated with genuine surprise. "Good heavens! Whatever you are looking for, there's very little of it here, very little of anything." "You would naturally say so, but that's not what we have heard," retorted Mr. Jones quickly, with a grin so ghastly that it was impossible to think it voluntary. Haste's face had grown very gloomy. He knitted his brows. "What have you heard?" he asked. "A lot, Mr. Haste, a lot," affirmed Mr. Jones. He was vying to recover his manner of languid superiority. "We have heard, for instance, of a certain Mr. Morrison, once your partner." Haste could not repress a slight movement. "Ha! said Mr. Jones, with a sort of ghostly glee on his face. The muffled thunder resembled the echo of a distant cannonade below the horizon, and the two men seemed to be listening to it in sullen silence. This diabolical calumny will end in actually and literally taking my life from me, thought Haste. Then suddenly he laughed. Portentously spectral, Mr. Jones frowned at the sound. "Laugh as much as you please," he said. "I, who have been hounded out from society by a lot of highly moral souls, can't see anything funny in that story. But here we are, and you will now have to pay for your fun, Mr. Haste." "You have heard a lot of ugly lies," observed Haste. "Take my word for it." "You would say so, of course. Very natural. As a matter of fact, I haven't heard very much. Strictly speaking, it was Martin. He collects information and so on. You don't suppose that I would talk to that Schomburg animal more than I could possibly help? It was Martin whom he took into his confidence." "The stupidity of that creature is so great that it becomes formidable," Haste said, as if speaking to himself. Involuntarily, his mind turned to the girl, wandering in the forest, alone and terrified. Would he ever see her again? At that thought he nearly lost his self-possession. But the idea that if she followed his instructions, those men were not likely to find her steadied him a little. They did not know that the island had any inhabitants, and he himself once disposed of, they would be too anxious to get away to waste time hunting for a vanished girl. All this passed through Haste's mind in a flash, as men think in moments of danger. He looked speculatively at Mr. Jones, who, of course, had never for a moment taken his eyes from his intended victim. And the conviction came to Haste that this outlaw from the higher spheres was an absolutely hard and pitiless scoundrel. Mr. Jones's voice made him start. "It would be useless, for instance, to tell me that your Chinaman has run off with your money. A man living alone with a Chinaman on an island takes care to conceal property of that kind so well that the devil himself—" "Certainly," Haste muttered. Again, with his left hand, Mr. Jones mopped his frontal bone, his stork-like neck, his razor jaws, his fleshless chin. Again his voice faltered, and his aspect became still more gruesomely malevolent, as of a wicked and pitiless corpse. "I see what you mean," he cried. "But you mustn't put too much trust in your ingenuity. You don't strike me as a very ingenious person, Mr. Haste. Neither am I. My talents lie another way. But Martin—" "Who is now engaged in rifling my desk," interjected Haste. "I don't think so. What I was going to say is that Martin is much cleverer than the Chinaman. Do you believe in racial superiority, Mr. Haste? I do, firmly. Martin is great at ferreting out such secrets as yours, for instance." "Secrets like mine?" repeated Haste bitterly. "Well, I wish him joy of all he can ferret out." "That's very kind of you," remarked Mr. Jones. He was beginning to be anxious for Martin's return. Of iron self-possession at the gaming table, fearless in a sudden affray, he found that this rather special kind of work was telling on his nerves. "Keep still as you are," he cried sharply. "I've told you I am not armed," said Haste, folding his arms on his breast. "I'm really inclined to believe that you are not," admitted Mr. Jones seriously. "Strange," he mused aloud. The caverns of his eyes turned upon Haste. Then briskly, "But my object is to keep you in this room. Don't provoke me by some unguarded movement to smash your knee or do something definite of that sort." He passed his tongue over his lips, which were dry and black, while his forehead glistened with moisture. "I don't know that it wouldn't be better to do it at once." "He who deliberates is lost," said Haste with grave mockery. Mr. Jones disregarded the remark. He had the air of communing with himself. "Physically, I'm no match for you," he said slowly, his black gaze fixed upon the man sitting on the end of the bed. "You could spring—" "Are you trying to frighten yourself?" asked Haste abruptly. "You don't seem to have quite enough pluck for your business. Why don't you do it at once?" Mr. Jones, taking violent offence, snorted like a savage skeleton. "Strange as it may seem to you, it is because of my origin, my breeding, my traditions, my early associations, and such-like trifles. Not everybody can divest himself of the prejudices of a gentleman as easily as you have done, Mr. Haste. But don't worry about my pluck. If you were to make a clean spring at me, you would receive in mid-air, so to speak, something that would make you perfectly harmless by the time you landed. No, don't misapprehend us, Mr. Haste. We are adequate bandits, and we were after the fruit of your labours as successful swindler. It's the way of the world. Gorge and disgorge." He leaned wearily the back of his head against the wall. His vitality seemed exhausted. Even his sunken eyelids drooped within the bony sockets. Only his thin, waspish, beautifully pencilled eyebrows, drawn together a little, suggested the will and the power to sting, something vicious, unconquerable, and deadly. "Fruits? Swindler?" repeated Haste, without heat, almost without contempt. "You are giving yourself no end of trouble, you and your faithful henchman, to crack an empty nut. There are no fruits here, as you imagine. There are a few sovereigns, which you may have if you like, and since you have called yourself a bandit—" "Yes," drawled Mr. Jones, "that rather than a swindler. Open warfare, at least." "Very good. Only let me tell you that there were never in the world two more deluded bandits. Never." Haste uttered these words with such energy that Mr. Jones, stiffening up, seemed to become thinner and taller in his metallic blue dressing-gown against the whitewashed wall. "Fooled by a silly, rascally innkeeper," Haste went on, "talked over like a pair of children with a promise of sweets." "I didn't talk with that disgusting animal," muttered Mr. Jones suddenly, "but he convinced Martin, who is no fool." "I should think he wanted very much to be convinced," said Haste, with the courteous intonation so well known in the islands. "I didn't want to disturb your touching trust in your follower, but he must be the most credulous brigand in existence. What do you imagine? If the story of my riches were ever so true, do you think Schomberg would have imparted it to you from sheer altruism? Is that the way of the world, Mr. Jones?" For a moment the lower jaw of Ricardo's gentleman dropped, but it came up with a snap of scorn, and he said with spectral intensity, "The beast is cowardly. He was frightened and wanted to get rid of us, if you want to know, Mr. Haste. I don't know that the material inducement was so very great, but I was bored, and we decided to accept the bribe. I don't regret it. All my life I've been seeking new impressions, and you've turned out to be something quite out of the common. Martin, of course, looks to the material results. He's simple and faithful, and wonderfully acute. Ah, yes, he's on the track." And now Haste's speech had the character of politely grim raillery, "but not sufficiently on the track as yet to make it quite convenient to shoot me without more ado. Didn't Schomberg tell you precisely where I conceal the fruits of my rapines? Ha! Don't you know he would have told you anything, true or false, from a very clear motive? Revenge! Mad hate! The unclean idiot!" Mr. Jones did not seem very much moved. On his right hand the doorway incessantly flickered with distant lightning, and the continuous rumble of thunder went on irritatingly, like the growl of an inarticulate giant muttering fatuously. Haste overcame his immense repugnance to allude to her whose image, cowering in the forest, was constantly before his eyes, with all the pathos and force of its appeal, august, pitiful, and almost holy to him. It was in a hurried, embarrassed manner that he went on, "If it had not been for that girl whom he persecuted with this insane and odious passion, and who threw herself on my protection, he would never have—" "But you know well enough." "I don't know," burst out Mr. Jones with amazing heat. "That hotel-keeper tried to talk me once of some girl he had lost, but I told him I didn't want to hear any of his beastly women's stories. It had something to do with you, had it?" Haste looked on serenely at this outburst, then lost his patience a little. "What sort of comedy is this? You don't mean to say that you didn't know that that there was a girl living with me here?" One could see that the eyes of Mr. Jones had become fixed in the depths of their black holes by the gleam of white becoming steady there. The whole man seemed frozen still. "Here? Here?" he screamed out twice. There was no mistaking his astonishment, his shocked incredulity, something like frightened disgust. Haste was disgusted also, but in another way. He too was incredulous. He regretted having mentioned the girl, but the thing was done. His repugnance had been overcome in the heat of the argument against the absurd bandit. "Is it possible that you didn't know of that significant fact?" he inquired. "Of the only effective truth in the welter of silly lies that deceived you so easily?" "No, I didn't," Mr. Jones shouted. "But Martin did," he added in a faint whisper, which Haste's ears just caught and no more. "I kept her out of sight as long as I could," said Haste. "Perhaps with your bringing up, traditions, and so on, you will understand my reasons for it." He knew. He knew before. Mr. Jones mourned in a hollow voice. He knew of her from the first. Backed hard against the wall, he no longer watched Haste. He had the air of a man who had seen an abyss yawning under his feet. "If I want to kill him, this is my time," thought Haste, but he did not move. Next moment Mr. Jones jerked his head up, glaring with sardonic fury. "I have a good mind to shoot you, you woman-ridden hermit, you man in the moon, that can't exist without— No, it won't be you that I'll shoot. It's the other woman-lover, the prevaricating, sly, low-class, amorous cuss. And he shaved under my very nose. I'll shoot him." "He's gone mad," thought Haste, startled by the spectre's sudden fury. He felt himself more in danger, nearer death than ever since he had entered that room. An insane bandit is a deadly combination. He could not know that Mr. Jones was quick-minded enough to see already the end of his reign over his excellent secretary's thoughts and feelings, the coming failure of Ricardo's fidelity. A woman had intervened. A woman, a girl, who apparently possessed the power to awaken men's disgusting folly. Her power had been proved in 2 instances already, the beastly innkeeper and that man with the moustaches, upon whom Mr. Jones, his deadly right hand twitching in his pocket, glared more in repulsion than in anger. The very object of the expedition was lost from view in his sudden and overwhelming sense of utter insecurity. And this made Mr. Jones feel very savage, but not against the man with the moustaches. Thus, while Haste was really feeling that his life was not worth 2 minutes' purchase, he heard himself addressed with no affectation of languid impertinence, but with a burst of feverish determination. "Here, let's call a truce," said Mr. Jones. Haste's heart was too sick to allow him to smile. "Have I been making war on you?" he asked wearily. "How do you expect me to attach any meaning to your words?" he went on. "You seem to be a morbid, senseless sort of bandit. We don't speak the same language. If I were to tell you why I am here talking to you, you wouldn't believe me, because you would not understand me. It certainly isn't the love of life, from which I have divorced myself long ago, and not sufficiently, perhaps. But if you are thinking of yours, then I repeat to you that it has never been in danger from me. I am unarmed." Mr. Jones was biting his lower lip in a deep meditation. It was only towards the last that he looked at Haste. "Unarmed, eh?" Then he burst out violently. "I tell you, a gentleman is no match for the common herd, and yet one must make use of the brutes. Unarmed, eh? And I suppose that creature is of the commonest sort. You could hardly have got her out of a drawing-room, though they're all alike for that matter. Unarmed? It's a pity. I'm in much greater danger than you are or were. Or I'm much mistaken. But I'm not. I know my man." He lost his air of mental vacancy and broke out into shrill exclamations. To Haste they seemed madder than anything that had gone before. "On the track, on the scent!" he cried, forgetting himself to the point of executing a dance of rage in the middle of the floor. Haste looked on, fascinated by this skeleton in a gay dressing-gown, jerkily agitated like a grotesque toy on the end of an invisible string. It became quiet suddenly. "I might have smelt a rat. I always knew that this would be the danger." He changed suddenly to a confidential tone, fixing his sepulchral stare on Haste. "And yet here I am, taken in by the fellow, like the veriest fool. I've been always on the watch for some beastly influence, but here I am fairly caught. He shaved himself right in front of me, and I never guessed. Ha!" The shrill laugh, following on the low tone of secrecy, sounded so convincingly insane that Haste got up as if moved by a spring. Mr. Jones stepped back 2 paces, but displayed no uneasiness. "It's as clear as daylight," he uttered mournfully, and fell silent. Behind him the doorway flickered lividly, and the sound of a naval action somewhere away on the horizon filled the breathless pause. Mr. Jones inclined his head on his shoulder. His mood had completely changed. "What do you say, unarmed man? Shall we go and see what is detaining my trusted Martin so long? He asked me to keep you engaged in friendly conversation till he made a further examination of that track. Ha, ha, ha!" "He is no doubt ransacking my house," said Haste. He was bewildered. It seemed to him that all this was an incomprehensible dream, or perhaps an elaborate otherworld joke, contrived by that spectre in a gorgeous dressing-gown. Mr. Jones looked at him with a horrible, cadaverous smile of inscrutable mockery, and pointed to the door. Haste passed through it first. His feelings had become so blunted that he did not care how soon he was shot in the back. "How oppressive the air is," the voice of Mr. Jones said at his elbow. "This stupid storm gets on my nerves. I would welcome some rain, though it would be unpleasant to get wet. On the other hand, this exasperating thunder has the advantage of covering the sound of our approach. The lightning is not so convenient. Ah, your house is fully illuminated. My clever Martin is punishing your stock of candles. He belongs to the unceremonious classes, which are also unlovely, untrustworthy, and so on." "I left the candles burning," said Haste, "to save him trouble." "You really believed he would go to your house?" asked Mr. Jones, with genuine interest. "I had that notion strongly. I do believe he is there now." "And you don't mind?" "No." "You don't?" Mr. Jones stopped to wonder. "You are an extraordinary man," he said suspiciously, and moved on, touching elbows with Haste. In the latter's breast dwelt a deep silence, the complete silence of unused faculties. At this moment, by simply shouldering Mr. Jones, he could have thrown him down and put himself by a couple of leaps beyond the certain aim of the revolver, but he did not even think of that. His very will seemed dead of weariness. He moved automatically, his head low, like a prisoner captured by the evil power of a masquerading skeleton out of a grave. Mr. Jones took charge of the direction. They fetched a wide sweep. The echoes of distant thunder seemed to dog their footsteps. "By the by," said Mr. Jones, as if unable to restrain his curiosity, "aren't you anxious about that that fascinating creature, to whom you owe whatever pleasure you can find in our visit?" "I have placed her in safety," said Haste. I took good care of that." Mr. Jones laid a hand on his arm. "You have? Look, is that what you mean?" Haste raised his head. In the flicker of lightning, the desolation of the cleared ground on his left leapt out and sank into the night, together with the elusive forms of things distant, pale, unearthly. But in the brilliant square of the door he saw the girl, the woman he had longed to see once more, as if enthroned, with her hands on the arms of the chair. She was in black, her face was white, her head dreamily inclined on her breast. He saw her only as low as her knees. He saw her, there in the room, alive with a sombre reality. It was no mocking vision. She was not in the forest, but there. She sat there in the chair, seemingly without strength, yet without fear, tenderly stooping. "Can you understand their power?" whispered the hot breath of Mr. Jones into his ear. Can there be a more disgusting spectacle? It's enough to make the earth detestable. She seems to have found her affinity. Move on closer. If I have to shoot you in the end, then perhaps you will die cured." Haste obeyed the pushing pressure of a revolver barrel between his shoulders. He felt it distinctly, but he did not feel the ground under his feet. They found the steps without his being aware that he was ascending them, slowly, one by one. Doubt entered into him, a doubt of a new kind, formless, hideous. It seemed to spread itself all over him, enter his limbs, and lodge in his entrails. He stopped suddenly with a thought that he who experienced such a feeling had no business to live, or perhaps was no longer living. Everything, the bungalow, the forest, the open ground, trembled incessantly. The earth, the sky itself, shivered all the time, and the only thing immovable in the shuddering universe was the interior of the lighted room, and the woman in black sitting in the light of the 8 candle flames. They flung around her an intolerable brilliance which hurt his eyes, seemed to sear his very brain with the radiation of infernal heat. It was some time before his scorched eyes made out Ricardo, seated on the floor at some little distance, his back to the doorway, but only partly so. One side of his upturned face showing the absorbed, all-forgetful rapture of his contemplation. The grip of Mr. Jones's hard claw drew Haste back a little. In the roll of thunder, swelling and subsiding, he whispered in his ear a sarcastic, "Of course." A great shame descended upon Haste, the shame of guilt, absurd and maddening. Mr. Jones drew him still further back into the darkness of the veranda. "This is serious," he went on, distilling his ghostly venom into Haste's very ear. "I had to shut my eyes many times to his little flings. But this is serious. He has found his soul-mate. Mud souls, obscene and cunning. Mud bodies, too, the mud of the gutter. I tell you, we are no match for the vile populace. Even I, have been nearly caught. He asked me to detain you till he gave me the signal. It won't be you that I'll have to shoot, but him. I wouldn't trust him near me for 5 minutes after this." He shook Haste's arm a little. "If you had not happened to mention the creature, we should both have been dead before morning. He would have stabbed you as you came down the stairs after leaving me, and then he would have walked up to me and planted the same knife between my ribs. He has no prejudices. The viler the origin, the greater the freedom of these simple souls." He drew a cautious, hissing breath, and added in an agitated murmur, "I can see right into his mind. I have been nearly caught napping by his cunning." He stretched his neck to peer into the room from the side. Haste, too, made a step forward, under the slight impulse of that slender hand, clasping his hand with a thin, bony grasp. "Behold," the skeleton of the crazy bandit jabbered thinly into his ear in spectral fellowship. "Behold the simple Acis, kissing the sandals of the nymph, on the way to her lips, all forgetful, while the menacing fife of Polyphemus already sounds close at hand. If he could only hear it. Stoop a little." Chapter 12. On returning to the Haste bungalow, rapid as if on wings, Ricardo found Lena waiting for him. She was dressed in black, and at once his uplifting exultation was replaced by an awed and quivering patience before her white face, before the immobility of her reposeful pose, the more amazing to him who had encountered the strength of her limbs and the indomitable spirit in her body. She had come out after Haste's departure, and had sat down under the portrait to wait for the return of the man of violence and death. While lifting the curtain, she felt the anguish of her disobedience to her lover, which was soothed by a feeling she had known before, a gentle flood of penetrating sweetness. She was not automatically obeying a momentary suggestion. She was under influences more deliberate, more vague, and of greater potency. She had been prompted not by her will, but by a force that was outside of her and more worthy. She reckoned upon nothing definite. She had calculated nothing. She saw only her purpose of capturing death, savage, sudden, irresponsible death, prowling round the man who possessed her, death embodied in the knife ready to strike into his heart. No doubt it had been a sin to throw herself into his arms. With that inspiration that descends at times from above, for the good or evil of our common mediocrity, she had the sense of having been for him only a violent and sincere choice of curiosity and pity, a thing that passes. She did not know him. If he were to go away from her and disappear, she would utter no reproach, she would not resent it, for she would hold in herself the impress of something most rare and precious. His embraces made her own by her courage in saving his life. All she thought of, the essence of her tremors, her flushes of heat, and her shudders of cold, was the question how to get hold of that knife, the mark and sign of stalking death. A tremor of impatience to clutch the frightful thing, glimpsed once and unforgettable, agitated her hands. The instinctive flinging forward of these hands stopped Ricardo dead short between the door and her chair, with the ready obedience of a conquered man who can bide his time. Her success disconcerted her. She listened to the man's impassioned transports of terrible eulogy and even more awful declarations of love. She was even able to meet his eyes, oblique, apt to glide away, throwing feral gleams of desire. "No," he was saying, after a fiery outpouring of words, in which the most ferocious phrases of love were mingled with wooing accents of entreaty. "I will have no more of it. Don't you mistrust me. I'm sober in my talk. Feel how quietly my heart beats. 10 times today when you swam in my eye, I thought it would burst one of my ribs or leap out of my throat. It has knocked itself dead and tired, waiting for this evening, for this very minute. And now it can do no more. Feel how quiet it is." He made a step forward, but she raised her clear voice commandingly. "No nearer." He stopped with a smile of imbecile worship on his lips, and with the delighted obedience of a man who could at any moment seize her in his hands and dash her to the ground. "Ah, if I had taken you by the throat this morning and had my way with you, I should never have known what you are. And now I do. You are a wonder, and so am I in my way. I have nerve, and I have brains too. We should have been lost many times but for me. I plot for my gentleman. Gentleman, pah, I'm sick of him. And you are sick of yours, eh? You? He shook all over. He cooed at her a string of endearing names, obscene and tender, and then asked abruptly, "Why don't you speak to me?" "It's my part to listen," she said, giving him an inscrutable smile, with a flush on her cheek and her lips cold as ice. "But you will answer me?" "Yes," she said, her eyes dilated as if with sudden interest. "Where's that plunder? Do you know?" "No, not yet." "But there is plunder stowed away somewhere that's worth having?" "Yes, I think so." "But who knows?" she added after a pause. "And who cares?" he retorted recklessly. "I've had enough of all this crawling on my belly. It's you who are my treasure. It's I who found you out where a gentleman had buried you to rot for his accursed pleasure." He looked behind him and all around for a seat, then turned to her his troubled eyes and dim smile. "I'm dog-tired," he said, and sat down on the floor. "I went tired this morning, since I came in here and started talking to you. As tired as if I'd been pouring my lifeblood here on these planks for you to dabble your white feet in." Unmoved, she nodded at him thoughtfully. Womanlike, all her faculties remained concentrated on her heart's desire, on the knife, while the man went on babbling insanely at her feet, ingratiating and savage, almost crazy with elation. But he too was holding on to his purpose. For you I will throw away money, lives, all the lives but mine. What you want is a man, a master that will let you put the heel of your shoe on his neck. Not that skulker who will get tired of you in a year, and you of him. And then what? You are not the one to sit still, neither am I. I live for myself, and you shall live for yourself too, not for a Swedish baron. They make a convenience of people like you and me. A gentleman is better than an employer, but an equal partnership against all the hypocrites is the thing for you and me. We'll go on wandering the world over, you and I, both free and both true. You and no caged bird, we'll rove together, For we are of them that have no homes. We are born rovers." She listened to him with the utmost attention, as if any unexpected word might give her some sort of opening to get that dagger, that awful knife, to disarm murder itself, pleading for her love at her feet. Again she nodded at him thoughtfully, rousing a gleam in his yellow eyes, yearning devotedly upon her face. When he hitched himself a little closer, her soul had no movement of recoil. This had to be. Anything had to be which would bring the knife within her reach. He talked more confidentially now. "We have met, and their time has come," he began, looking up into her eyes. "The partnership between me and my gentleman has to be ripped up. There's no room for him where we two are. Why, he would shoot me like a dog. Don't you worry. This will settle it not later than tonight." He tapped his folded leg below the knee, and was surprised, flattered by the lighting up of her face, which stooped towards him eagerly and remained expectant, the lips girlishly parted, red in the pale face, and quivering in the quickened drawing of her breath. "You marvel, you miracle, you man's luck and joy. 1 in a million. No, the only one. You found your man in me," he whispered tremulously. "Listen, they're having our last talk together. For I'll do for your gentleman too by midnight." Without the slightest tremor she murmured, as soon as the tightening of her breast had eased off and the words would come, "I wouldn't be in too much of a hurry with him." The pause, the tone, had all the value of meditative advice. "Good, thrifty girl." He laughed low, with a strange feline gaiety, expressed by the undulating movement of his shoulders and the sparkling snap of his oblique eyes. "You are still thinking about the chance of that swag. You make a good partner, that you will. And I say, what a decoy you will make. Jiminy." He was carried away for a moment, but his face darkened swiftly. No reprieve. What do you think a fellow is? A scarecrow? All hat and clothes and no feeling, no inside, no brain to make fancies for himself? No," he went on violently, "never in his life will he go again into that room of yours. Never any more." The silence fell. He was gloomy with the torment of his jealousy, and did not even look at her. She sat up and slowly, gradually bent lower and lower over him, as if ready to fall into his arms. He looked up at last, and checked this droop unwittingly. "Say, you were up to fighting a man with your bare hands. Could you manage to stick one with a thing like that knife of mine?" She opened her eyes very wide and gave him a wild smile. "How can I tell?" she whispered enchantingly. "Will you let me have a look at it?" Without taking his eyes from her face, he pulled the knife out of its sheath, a short, broad, cruel, double-edged blade with a bone handle, and only then looked down at it. "A good friend," he said simply. "Take it in your hand and feel the balance," he suggested. At the moment when she bent forward to receive it from him, there was a flash of fire in her mysterious eyes, a red gleam in the white mist which wrapped the promptings and longings of her soul. She had done it. The very sting of death was in her hands, the venom of the viper in her paradise, extracted, safe in her possession, and the viper's head all but lying under her heel. Ricardo, stretched on the mats of the floor, crept closer and closer to the chairs in which she sat. All her thoughts were busy planning how to keep possession of that weapon, which had seemed to have drawn into itself every danger and menace on the death-ridden earth. She said with a low laugh, the exultation in which he failed to recognise, "I didn't think that you would ever trust me with that thing." "Why not?" "For fear I should suddenly strike you with it." "What for? For this morning's work?" "Oh, no, there's no spiting you for that. You forgave me, you saved me. You got the better of me too. And anyhow, what good would it be?" No good," she admitted. In her heart she felt that she would not know how to do it, that if it came to a struggle she would have to drop the dagger and fight with her hands. "Listen, when we're going about the world together, you shall always call me husband. Do you hear?" "Yes," she said, bracing herself for the contest, in whatever shape it was coming. The knife was lying in her lap. She let it slip into the fold of her dress, and laid her forearms with clasped fingers over her knees, which she pressed desperately together. The dreaded thing was out of sight at last. She felt a dampness break out all over her. "I'm not going to hide you like that good-for-nothing, finicky, sneery gentleman. You should be my pride and my chum. Isn't that better than rotting on an island for the pleasure of a gentleman till he gives you the chuck?" "I'll be anything you like," she said. In his intoxication, he crept closer with every word she uttered, with every movement she made. "Give your foot," he begged in a timid murmur, and in the full consciousness of his power. Anything to keep murder quiet and disarmed till strength had returned to her limbs and she could make up her mind what to do. Her fortitude had been shaken by the very facility of success that had come to her. She advanced her foot forward a little from under the hem of her skirt, and he threw herself on it greedily. She was not even aware of him. She had thought of the forest, to which she had been told to run. Yes, the forest. That was the place for her to carry off the terrible spoil, the sting of vanquished death. Ricardo, clasping her ankle, pressed his lips time after time to the instep, muttering gasping words that were like sobs, making little noises that resembled the sounds of grief and distress. Unheard by them both, the thunder growled distantly with angry modulations of its tremendous voice, while the world outside shuddered incessantly around the dead stillness of the room where the framed profile of Haste's father looked severely into space. Suddenly Ricardo felt himself spurned by the foot he had been cherishing, spurned with a push of such violence into the very hollow of his throat that it swung him back instantly into an upright position on his knees. He read his danger in the stony eyes of the girl, and in the very act of leaping to his feet he heard sharply, detached on the comminatory voice of the storm, the brief report of a shot which half stunned him in the manner of a blow. He turned his burning head and saw Haste towering in the doorway. The thought that the beggar had started to prance darted through his mind. For a fraction of a second his distracted eyes sought for his weapon all over the floor. He couldn't see it. "Stick him, you!" he called hoarsely to the girl, and dashed headlong for the door of the compound. While he thus obeyed the instinct of self-preservation, his reason was telling him that he could not possibly reach it alive. It flew open, however, with a crash before his launched weight, and instantly he swung it to behind him. There, his shoulder leaning against it, his hands clinging to the handle, dazed and alone in the night full of shudders and muttered menaces, he tried to pull himself together. He asked himself if he had been shot at more than once. His shoulder was wet with the blood trickling from his head. Feeling above his ear, he ascertained that it was only a graze, but the shock of the surprise had unmanned him for the moment. What the deuce was the governor about to let the beggar break loose like this? Or was the governor dead, perhaps? The silence within the room awed him. Of going back there could be no question. "But she knows how to take care of herself," he muttered. She had his knife. It was she now who was deadly, while he was disarmed, no good for the moment. He stole away from the door, staggering, the warm trickle running down his neck, to find out what had become of the governor, and to provide himself with a firearm from the armoury in the trunks. Chapter 13. Mr. Jones, after firing his shot over Haste's shoulder, had thought it proper to dodge away. Like the spectre he was, he noiselessly vanished from the veranda. Haste stumbled into the room and looked around. All the objects in there, the books, portrait on the wall, seemed shadowy, unsubstantial, the dumb accomplices of an amazing dream plot, ending in an illusory effect of awakening and the impossibility of ever closing his eyes again. With dread he forced himself to look at the girl. Still in the chair, she was leaning forward far over her knees and had hidden her face in her hands. Haste remembered Wang suddenly. How clear all this was, and how extremely amusing. Very. She sat up a little, then leaned back, and taking her hands from her face, pressed both of them to her breast, as if moved to the heart of seeing him there looking at her with a black, horror-struck curiosity. He would have pitied her if the triumphant expression of her face had not given him a shock which destroyed the balance of his feelings. She spoke with an accent of wild joy. "I knew you would come back in time. You are safe now. I've done it. I would never, never have let him—" Her voice died out, while her eyes shone at him as when the sun breaks through a mist. "Never get it back. Oh, my beloved!" He bowed his head gravely and said in his polite, Hastian tone, "No doubt you acted from instinct. Women have been provided with their own weapon. I was a disarmed man, and have been a disarmed man all my life as I see it now. You may glory in your resourcefulness and your profound knowledge of yourself, but I may say that the other attitude, suggestive of shame, had its charm, for you are full of charm." The exultation vanished from her face. "You mustn't make fun of me now. I know no shame. I was thanking God with all my sinful heart for having been able to do it, for giving you to me in that way. Oh, my beloved, all my own at last." He stared as if mad. Timidly she tried to excuse herself for disobeying his directions for her safety. Every modulation of her enchanting voice cut deep into his very breast, so that he could hardly understand the words for the sheer pain of it. He turned his back on her, but a sudden drop, an extraordinary faltering of her tone, made him spin round. On her white neck her pale head dropped, as in a cruel drought a withered flower droops on its stalk. He caught his breath, looked at her closely, and seemed to read some awful intelligence in her eyes. At the moment when her eyelids fell as if smitten from above by a gleam of old silver familiar to him from boyhood, the very invisible power, he snatched her up bodily out of the chair, and disregarding an unexpected metallic clatter on the floor, carried her off into the other room. The limpness of her body frightened him. Laying her down on the bed, he ran out again, seized a 4-branched candlestick on the table and ran back, tearing down with a furious jerk the curtain that swung stupidly in his way. But after putting the candlestick on the table by the bed, he remained absolutely idle. There did not seem anything more for him to do. Holding his chin in his hand, he looked down intently at her still face. "Has she been stabbed with this thing?" asked Davidson, whom suddenly he saw standing by his side and holding up Ricardo's dagger to his sight. Haste uttered no word of recognition or surprise. He gave Davidson only a dumb look of unutterable awe, then, as if possessed with a sudden fury, started tearing open the front of the girl's dress. She remained insensible under his hands, and Haste let out a groan which made Davidson shudder inwardly, the heavy plaint of a man who falls clubbed in the dark. They stood side by side, looking mournfully at the little black hole made by Mr. Jones's bullet under the swelling breast of a dazzling and, as it were, sacred whiteness. It rose and fell slightly, so slightly that only the eyes of the lover could detect the faint stir of life. Haste, calm and utterly unlike himself in the face, moving about noiselessly, prepared a wet cloth and laid it on the insignificant wound, round which there was hardly a trace of blood to mar the charm, the fascination of that mortal flesh. Her eyelids fluttered. She looked drowsily about, serene, as if fatigued only by the exertions of her tremendous victory, capturing the very sting of death in the service of love. But her eyes became very wide awake when they caught sight of Ricardo's dagger, the spoil of vanquished death, which Davidson was still holding unconsciously. "Give it to me," she said. "It's mine." Davidson put the symbol of her victory into her feeble hands, extended to him with the innocent gesture of a child reaching eagerly for a toy. "For you," she gasped, turning her eyes to Haste. "Kill nobody." "No," said Haste, taking the dagger and laying it gently on her breast, while her hands fell powerless by her side. The faint smile on her deep-cut lips waned, and her head sank deep into the pillow, taking on the majestic pallor and immobility of marble. But over the muscles, which seemed set in their transfigured beauty forever, passed a slight and awful tremor. With an amazing strength she asked loudly, "What's the matter with me?" "You have been shot, dear Lena," Haste said in a steady voice, while Davidson, at the question, turned away and leaned his forehead against the post at the foot of the bed. "Shot? I did think, too, that something had struck me." Over Samburan the thunder had ceased to growl at last, and the world of material forms shuddered no more under the emerging stars. The spirit of the girl which was passing away from under them clung to her triumph, convinced of the reality of her victory over death. "No more," she muttered. "There will be no more. Oh, my beloved," she cried weakly, "I've saved you. Why don't you take me into your arms and carry me out of this lonely place?" Haste bent low over her, cursing his fastidious soul, which even at that moment kept the true cry of love from his lips in its infernal mistrust of all life. He dared not touch her, and she had no longer the strength to throw her arms about his neck. "Who else could have done this for you?" she whispered gloriously. "No one in the world," he answered her, in a murmur of unconcealed despair. She tried to raise herself, but all she could do was to lift her head a little from the pillow. With a terrible and gentle movement, Haste hastened to slip his arm under her neck. She felt relieved at once of an intolerable weight, and was content to surrender to him the infinite weariness of her tremendous achievement. Exulting, she saw herself extended on the bed, in a black dress, and profoundly at peace, while, stooping over her with a kindly, playful smile, he was ready to lift her up in his firm arms and take her into the sanctuary of his innermost heart, forever. The flush of rapture flooding her whole being broke out in a smile of innocent, girlish happiness, and with that divine radiance on her lips, she breathed her last, triumphant, seeking for his glance in the shades of death. Chapter 14. "Yes, Excellency," said Davidson, his placid voice. "There are more dead in this affair, more white people, I mean, than have been killed in many of the battles in the last Achin War." Davidson was talking with an Excellency because what was alluded to in a conversation as the mystery of Samburan had caused such a sensation in the archipelago that even those in the highest spheres were anxious to hear something at first hand. Davidson had been summoned to an audience. It was a high official on his tour. "You knew the late Baron Haste well?" "The truth is that nobody out here can boast of having known him well," said Davidson. "He was a queer chap. I doubt if he himself knew how queer he was, but everybody was aware that I was keeping my eye on him in a friendly way, and that's how I got the warning which made me turn around in my tracks. In the middle of my trip and steam back to Samburan, where I am grieved to say I arrived too late." Without enlarging very much, Davidson explained to the attentive Excellency how a woman, the wife of a certain hotel-keeper named Schomburg, had overheard two card-sharping rascals making inquiries from her husband as to the exact position of the island. She caught only a few words referring to the neighbouring volcano, but they were enough to arouse her suspicions, which, went on Davidson, she imparted to me, Your Excellency. They were only too well-founded." "That was very clever of her," remarked the great man. "She is much cleverer than people have any conception of," said Davidson. But he refrained from disclosing to the Excellency the real cause which had sharpened Mrs. Schomburg's wits. The poor woman was in mortal terror of the girl being brought back within reach of her infatuated Wilhelm. Davidson only said that her agitation had impressed him, but he confessed that while going back he began to have his doubts as to there being anything in it. "I steamed into one of those silly thunderstorms that hang about the volcano and had some trouble in making the island," narrated Davidson. "I had to grope my way dead slow into Diamond Bay. I don't suppose that anybody, even if looking out for me, could have heard me let go the anchor." He admitted that he ought to have gone ashore at once, but everything was perfectly dark and absolutely quiet. He felt ashamed of his impulsiveness. What a fool he would have looked, waking up a man in the middle of the night just to ask him if he was all right. And then the girl being there, he feared that Haste would look upon his visit as an unwarrantable intrusion. The first intimation he had of there being anything wrong was a big white boat, adrift with the dead body of a very hairy man inside, bumping against the bows of his steamer. Then, indeed, he lost no time in going ashore, alone, of course, from motives of delicacy. "I arrived in time to see that poor girl die, as I have told Your Excellency," pursued Davidson. I won't tell you what a time I had with him afterwards. He talked to me. His father seems to have been a crank, and to have upset his head when he was young. He was a queer chap. Practically the last words he said to me as we came out on the veranda were, "Ah, Davidson, woe to the man whose heart has not learned while young to hope, to love, and to put its trust in life." As we stood there just before I left him, for he said he wanted to be alone with his dead for a time, we heard a snarly sort of voice near the bushes by the shore calling out, "Is that you, governor?" "Yes, it's me." "Jiminy, I thought the beggar had done for you. He has started prancing and nearly had me. I've been dodging around looking for you ever since." "Well, here I am," suddenly screamed the other voice, and then a shot rang out. "This time he has not missed him," Haste said to me bitterly, and went back to the house. I returned on board as he had insisted I should do. I didn't want to intrude on his grief. Later, about 5 in the morning, some of my calashes came running to me, yelling that there was a fire ashore. I landed at once, of course. The principal bungalow was blazing. The heat drove us back. The other 2 houses caught one after another like kindling wood. There was no going beyond the shore end of the jetty till the afternoon, Davidson sighed placidly. "I suppose you are certain that Baron Haste is dead?" "He is. Ashes, Your Excellency," said Davidson, wheezing a little. "He and the girl together. I suppose he couldn't stand his thoughts before her dead body, and fire purifies everything. That Chinaman of whom I told Your Excellency helped me to investigate the next day, when the embers cooled a little. We found enough to be sure. He's not a bad Chinaman. He told me that he had followed Haste and the girl through the forest from pity, and partly out of curiosity. He watched the house till he saw Haste go out after dinner, and Ricardo came back alone. While he was dodging there, it occurred to him that he had better cast the boat adrift, for fear those scoundrels should come round by water and bombard the village from the sea with their revolvers and Winchesters. He judged that they were devils enough for anything. So he walked down the wharf quietly, and as he got into the boat to cast her off, that hairy man, who, it seems, was dozing in her, jumped up growling, and Wang shot him dead. Then he shoved the boat off as far as he could and went away. There was a pause. Presently Davidson went on in his tranquil manner. "Let heaven look after what has been purified. The wind and rain will take care of the ashes. The carcass of that follower, secretary, or whatever the unclean ruffian called himself, I left where it lay, to swell and rot in the sun. His principal had shot him neatly through the head. Then, apparently, this Jones went down to the wharf to look for the boat and for the hairy man. I suppose he tumbled into the water by accident, or perhaps not by accident. The boat and the man were gone, and the scoundrel saw himself alone, his game clearly up and fairly trapped. Who knows? The water's very clear there, and I could see him huddled up on the bottom between 2 piles, like a heap of bones in a blue silk bag, with only the head and the feet sticking out. Wang was very pleased when he discovered him. That made everything safe, he said, and he went at once over the hill to fetch his Alfura woman back to the hut. Davidson took out his handkerchief to wipe the perspiration off his forehead. "And then, Your Excellency, I went away. There was nothing to be done there." "Clearly," assented the Excellency. Davidson, thoughtful, seemed to weigh the matter in his mind, and then murmured with placid sadness, "Nothing."